So 논리들 듣는 게 좀 그만큼 이제 또 이것들을 체감시키기 위해서 많은 자료와 인터뷰들을 모아낸 감독의 노력이 좀 느껴지기도 했는데요. 다들 영화를 어떻게 봤는지 좀 백은하우 서기관님께서 먼저 좀 말씀해 주시죠.
Sure, thank you. It was definitely a powerful film. It was powerful, it was sobering. At the same time, I find what was intriguing about it, it was inspiring. And if I had to take something away, I would say there were three main points that this made me think about. The first one is we have to face our past. We have to look at the mistakes that we've made as societies and come to terms with those mistakes. And it's only through facing the difficult, sometimes uncomfortable histories that our societies face that we can really move on and advance together. So that's the first. The second point that I had to think about watching this, being a different generation, is that we can't take our freedoms for granted. We can't assume that they're just given and they're there to stay. But there were people, trailblazers, pioneers, who fought and made a difference, sacrificed so much so that we could achieve what liberties and freedoms we have today. The fact that I'm here with my husband, the fact that we have the right to have a child, that speaks to the volumes of work that society has moved forward with together because of the sacrifices of people like Dr. Kameny. The final point I would say is that we've got to remember that we're all in this together. And that makes me think back. I lived in Germany for a long time, and it makes me think back to a German pastor who experienced World War II and the tragedies and the atrocities of that period of time. His name was Martin Niemöller. And Mr. Niemöller, reflecting back on the tragedies of World War II, he thought about his tacit acceptance of what happened to all these different groups of people and the tragedies. And when he was reflecting on that guilt and that responsibility that he had an expression or a phrase that I wanted to share because I think it speaks vividly to the role that we all have to stand up and support each other. He said, "At first, they came for the socialists, but I didn't say anything because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not say anything because I am not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jew. I did not speak up because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there is no one to speak up for me." So we all are in this together. We all have to defend each other's rights because without each other, we have nothing. Thank you.
연대의 중요성에 대해서 중요한 말씀을 해주셨습니다. 다음 이호림 상임활동가님께 감상 좀 여쭙겠습니다.
저는 사실은 이거를 보면서 그 프랭크 카메니 할아버지에게 약간 죄송한 마음이 들었어요. 그게 뭐냐면 저는 어쨌든 스토너 일이라는 일이 일어난 지 한참 이후에 태어난 사람으로서 그러니까 스토널이라는 사건이 굉장히 혁명적인 사건이었기 때문에 그러니까는 제가 미국 사회가 아니라 한국 사회에 살고 있음에도 불구하고 그 역사 서술을 어떤 방식으로 제가 이해했냐면은 그러니까 굉장히 전환이 되는 그래서 이 과거의 어떤 한계를 되게 뛰어넘는 그런 방식으로 이해를 했는데 그러니까 제가 읽었었던 그 스토널의 그런 의미를 강조하는 책들에도 그런 방식으로 쓰여 있었던 거예요. 예를 들면 여러분 함께 보신 백악관 앞에서 이렇게 피켓팅을 하는 장면에 그러니까 남자들은 양복을 입고 여자들은 원피스와 하이힐을 신고 그렇게 드레스 코드를 정했다. 뭐 이런 이야기들이 나오잖아요. 그러니까 그런 것들이 굉장히 어떤 이 사회 규범의 수능적인 그리고 그렇게 해서 받아들여지고자 하는 되게 동아주의적인 그런 운동을 이렇게 비판하는 포인트들로 사실은 저는 프랭크 카멘이라는 분의 이름을 알게 된 거죠. 그래서 그분이 살았던 어떤 시대의 맥락에 대해서 제가 한 번도 이렇게 생각해볼 계기가 없었고 그냥 그런 사람이라고 이렇게 알고 있었던 거예요. 근데 영화를 보면서 이 분 역시도 그 과거의 어떤 그러니까 사람들이 살아가는 방식에서 뭔가 목소리를 내고 저항을 하고 그런 면에서 또 이분의 그 시대에서 어떤 굉장히 전환적인 행동을 해내신 분인 거잖아요. 그래서 제가 그렇게 약간 납작하게 그분을 이해하고 있었다라는 사실에 대해서 약간의 죄송함을 느꼈고 심지어 이분이 여기 영화에서 보니까 돌아가신 저희 할머니들보다도 한 10살이 많으신 그런 분이더라고요. 그래서 좀 그런 어떤 과거의 일들에 대해서 과거에 있었던 사람들이 만든 변화에 대해서 정말 그것을 그 시대의 맥락에서 생각하면서 이 현재의 어떤 진보를 만든 사람들에 대해서 좀 감사하는 마음을 가져야겠다라는 생각을 한편으로 했습니다. 그리고 또 하나는 그 메카시즘 시대에 그 공산주의자에 대한 공포가 동성애자에 대한 공포로 전환되었다라는 내용을 보면서 그러니까 2015년에 있었던 일이 떠올랐는데요. 그게 뭐냐 하면은 당시 박근혜 정부 하에서 그 KBS 한국방송공사의 이사였던 사람이 극우 단체의 그러니까 반동성혼 관련한 행사에서 그러니까 좌파가 세 가지가 있는데 그 뭐 어떤 좌파가 있고 또는 더러운 좌파가 있다. 더러운 좌파가 그러니까 성소수자인 좌파다. 그래서 성소수자와 좌파 사이에 굉장히 더러운 커넥션이 있다. 뭐 이런 이야기를 하신 적이 있어요. 그 사건이 이렇게 떠오르더라고요. 그러니까 이 어떤 공산주의와 동성애를 연결지으면서 그것을 둘 다 낙인 찍는 방식의 어떤 이런 프레이밍이 사실 반복되는 일이고 그 어떤 보수 세력에 의해서 그것이 굉장히 우리에게도 어떤 익숙한 장면으로 남아있는 기억이 있다라는 생각이 들면서 네, 이것이 굉장히 과거의 일이지만 어떤 순간에 다른 방식으로 반복되기도 하면서 진행되는 일이구나라는 생각을 네, 하기도 했습니다.
네, 사실 뭐 반공주의라고 하면은 우리 사회도 이제 세계 어디에도 뭐 비기지 않을 정도로 굉장히 강한 뭐 그런 역사를 가지고 있잖아요. 그런 점을 좀 지적해 주셨습니다. 마지막으로는 이제 스팀 프로그래머님께 좀 뭐 감상 여쭙겠습니다.
Yes. First, you should not feel badly that you didn't know too much about Frank Kameny. Frankly, most Americans, even gay Americans, don't know too much about Dr. Kameny, and that is part of the importance of the film, in a way, is to shine a light even on very dark chapters of American history. Of course, we love our heroes in films. Frank Kameny is an unlikely hero, and to some people, an unlikable hero. He was a difficult man. But what I loved about the film is it also indicates that every hero, every movement, whether successful or not, is standing on the shoulders of people who came before. Even Dr. Kameny was picketing in front of a White House that was just 1 kilometer away, where 2 years earlier, Bayard Rustin, a gay African-American leader, had organized and stood at the podium of the enormous March on Washington, which brought hundreds of thousands of civil rights protesters advocating for the rights of African-Americans, for jobs and justice. Even Dr. Kameny was standing on shoulders that I'm not sure he would even acknowledge. But I love the fact that this film shows that every movement of resilience can be an inspiration for another generation of resilience.
예, 이제 좀 본격적으로 질문을 드려볼게요. 우선 예근호 서기관님께 좀 질문 드리겠습니다. 이 영화는 이제 프라이드 영화제가 주한 미국 대사관과 함께 준비한 미국 퀴어 시네마 특별전의 일부인데요. 이번 특별전을 통해 이제 한국 관객들, 또 한국 시민들과 소통하고 싶은 메시지가 따로 있으신지요?
Yes, thank you for that. First of all, it's a sincere pleasure to be part of this panel and to know that the embassy helped sponsor this series. Next year, we celebrate the 70th anniversary of our special alliance that we have with the Republic of Korea. And when I first came, I didn't realize actually to Korea, I didn't realize how deep that relationship was. We all know about the military cooperation, but it goes so much farther than that. And the shared values of democracy, this global partnership, and most importantly, I would say the respect for human rights that we share is fundamental to the work that we do together. And so being part of this, being part of being able to work with and collaborate with organizations and people who help defend and promote human rights is an extreme pleasure. And for the embassy here in Seoul to be part of an event and to help people who are promoting and defending the rights of LGBTQI plus persons in Korea is a great honor of mine. Thank you.
네, 영화 중에서 이제 오바마 대통령께서 프랭크 카메니 박사님을 백악관으로 불러 이제 소개하는 장면이 나왔었는데 굉장히 인상 깊었는데 미국 정부가 이제 이런 공무단위권 차별의 역사에 대해서 뭐 사과하거나 뭐 영해 회복을 위한 노력을 하거나 뭐 배상을 하거나 그랬던 것도 좀 있을까요?
Yeah, so I did not know about this story really before I watched this documentary. In fact, earlier this year. So it was revealing for me. It was a wonderful documentary to watch. Very challenging period for the U.S. and not a period that lasted only a decade, but it lasted almost 5 decades. So what we saw was that from 1942, military banned homosexuals in the military, and that ban was once again reaffirmed as late as 1982. And when you hear about and you hear talk about Don't Ask, Don't Tell that came about in 1993, this was considered a compromise, a way to sort of help homosexuals, gays, lesbians become part and active in the military as long as they would keep their private life private and not discuss it. But what we don't hear about is from 1993 up until the revocation of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2008, over 13,000 service members lost their jobs because of their sexuality, their sexual identity. And even after that point, after 2008, it wasn't until 2017, for example, that Secretary of State John Kerry publicly apologized for discrimination based on sexual orientation. We've come a long way, right? We've come a long way. It's taken a lot of time, but in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of progress. This progress has been in part based on legal precedent, based on efforts in the courts. But what I would say most importantly, we saw Barbara Giddens up there, an activist, and she one time said, which I think is so meaningful, she said, real progress isn't made through law. Real progress is made when you can change the hearts and minds of people. And I think that is fundamentally the message. Once we touch people and realize and show them that we're all humans, that we all fundamentally have a right to the same rights and to love, that is what really makes change.
네, 영화에서 다뤄지지 않은 사실관계들을 조금 더 여쭤봤고요. 일단 스팀 프로그래머님께 조금 더 질문 드린 다음에 서기관님께 추가적으로 더 질문 드리도록 하겠습니다. 프로그래머님, 이제 이 작품은 아주 차별이 심하던 이제 50년대부터 그 차별이 해소되는 최근의 이야기까지를 다루고 있는데요. 미국 사회가 이렇게 차별이 해소되는 방향으로 나아갈 수 있었던 동력은 무엇이라고 생각하십니까?
Oh, well, of course, I'm not a historian, but I do think that it is this sense, as the film indicates, luckily in the 1960s, we had a whole series of social movements in which there was a kind of maybe inevitable response, a kind of counter response to the conformity that reigned during the post-war period in the 1950s. So you had, in addition to, and most importantly, the civil rights movement that brought some measure of gains of equality and democratic rights to African Americans. You had the women's movement, and you had this nascent gay rights movement. And it's a little hard to even appreciate how quickly the reforms have come in positive ways for most LGBTQ populations in the United States. And we realized this whenever it was that marriage equality finally passed. I think it was 8 years ago. I mean, this was a shock even to Americans that that the country, through the Supreme Court, but really at the popular level, would embrace marriage equality for same-sex partners. And it was because, as Michael mentioned, the hearts of the people had already changed, and the law was frankly following their lead. That said, I think a film like this, which moves from kind of darkness to light, in a way, through a hero, does make us maybe a little. It may be too easy to take for granted that these gains are still extremely hard won, and there are still many populations in the queer community in the United States. I'm thinking particularly of transgender women who are now the scapegoats for national policies that still are unequal. Has that answered your question?
그리고 한국에서도 이제 뭐나 너에게 가는 길들 큐어 다큐멘터리들이 최근 호평을 받고 또 이제 극장 개봉까지 이어졌고 이번 영화제에서도 많은 다큐멘터리 작품들이 상영되는데요. 일단 뭐 한국 오신 김에 꼭 보실 수 있었으면 좋겠다 이런 생각이 들고요. 이런 한국 다큐멘터리들은 찾아가는 현실을 좀 다루고 있는 경우가 많습니다. 상대적으로 이제 라벤더 스퀘어 외에도 이제 이번 섹션에서 같이 준비되는 다큐멘터리는 아니고